Right,
Yeah, welcome back to Off Topic, episode 16. Joined by Margaret Bowater. How are you, Margaret?
I'm fine, thank you.
Now, you do something that's exciting to us and why we wanted to get you on. Could you kind of elaborate what that is with your works with dreams and whatnot and how all of that came about?
Well, I'm a psychotherapist. I mean, I trained originally as a teacher and then I moved into counselling and further kept going into psychotherapy. And in 1985, I joined a group of counsellors who were holding a practical dream practice group meeting fortnightly. And I belonged to that group for about 3 years, thoroughly enjoying the whole process. We laughed and cried and worked together and shared our dreams and explored and read everything we could lay hands on and so on. So that's where I started at the end of 1985, and I started keeping a dream journal straight away. And almost immediately I had a big dream of my own, which I interpreted to mean that dreams were part of my future career. And from there on, I developed dream work as a specialty within the framework of being a psychotherapist and trainer of counsellors. I joined the human development team at Presbyterian Support, who gave me the opportunity to start running dream courses in Auckland. Before that, I had run them in Thames, where I was living with my family. Within 3 years, we separated at the team, the Human Development Team, separated from Presbyterian Support and became the Human Development and Training Institute, where I was a co-director. So I had the opportunity then to develop a full 3-stage program of dream work, which was very popular as a training course among the trainees that we worked with training in the field of counselling. And so, you know,
that's a lot.
In 1991, I joined the International Association for the Study of Dreams, which is based in California, and subsequently went to 2 of their international conferences and presented workshops there.
Holy moly.
As well as the workshops that I've been delivering around New Zealand for 30-odd years and even in Australia. So I've been following this as a passion for 35, 36 years now.
Wow. It's very very interesting passion to have, and you can see that you've also written a couple of books.
Yes.
Can you give us a bit of a description on
Right.
what
Well, the first one was in 1997. By then I had been practicing dream work within my framework of being a psychotherapist, and I had been running dream workshops all around Auckland for some time, and I had started collecting examples of vivid dreams from people that I worked with. I got them always to give me a written record of the dream along with a written permission to quote it. So by the time I got to 1996, when I was writing the book, I had over 200 examples ready to use within that first book. I've always been interested in dreams not only as a reflection of personal growth, but also as a source of spiritual understanding. And of course I've read everything I could lay hands on. Initially, most of it was from a Jungian perspective, following on work by Carl Jung, Swiss psychiatrist. And then when I joined the International Association, there were a lot more authors doing a lot of research in America that we hardly ever heard about over here in New Zealand. So I was delighted to start reading their material, and when I went to the conference, I took a few books of my own with me, and I brought 9 of them back, nine new ones back that I hadn't read before.
It's good reading for the plane.
Oh, it was. It was very good. It's been very valuable, actually, because a lot of the new research covers topics that people like Freud and Jung had not had access to, like the research on trauma, for example, based on the work to do particularly with war veterans, and the research on brain scans, which was beginning to develop in the 1990s, and general neurological understandings about dreams that all the experts argued with one another about which was the most important way to approach them. And gradually I began to develop my own combination of techniques and methods for working with dreams, which were highly successful with the classes that I ran, because all the classes were full. They people... I mean, I was running, probably at least 100 workshops a year. So,
Wow.
one way or another, short ones and long ones. So I was learning fast, and my trainees were excited, and they began to. Well, I set up a certificate in dream work, and people began to complete that certificate, and the ones who had completed said, well, we haven't finished, we want more training. So we formed kind of a study group to start off with, and it grew into what I called the Advanced Dream Group for people who held my certificate, and then it began to expand even further, and in 2014 a group of us got together and set up the New Zealand Dream Network, which now has been going strong for the last 7 years now, based on the model of the International Association, but not formally linked, but we get their literature and we accept their stance on ethical issues, ethical criteria for dream work, and we try to be inclusive and allow different approaches to contribute to our understanding. We put out a bulletin quarterly. We run conferences at least once a year.
Very busy lady.
Very busy.
Very
Yes.
busy.
Keeps me alive.
Keeps you living. That's cool. That's feel alive.
I guess we'll dive into strip it all back, and if we're going to if you had to give, we'll start from the start, if you had to give just a definition of a dream, what's happening when you're dreaming, I guess, in your...
Well, where to start? If you learn about the sleep cycle, you know that the brain waves go through a regular cyclic pattern during the night, and within that cyclic pattern there are at least 4 stages of dream of sleep that have been identified, and one of those stages is called REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. In REM sleep is when we have a different chemical bath going on around the brain, which allows the brain, or rather the mind, that lives within the brain, to access a much wider range of memory and imagery, so that the brain is able to work on problem solving that is sometimes difficult or only half in awareness during waking hours. Now, REM sleep is the most vivid form of dreaming, but non-REM sleep also does have some dreams. For example, post-trauma nightmares happen in non-REM sleep, early in the night usually. And there is a certain kind of dreaming that's called mentation, which is a kind of slow process of thoughtful dreaming. Feels quite different from the exciting dreams of REM sleep. And then there are various levels of consciousness which, through dream sleep, we can sometimes access other levels of consciousness, which include things like lucid dreaming, which is very exciting to young people mostly.
Yeah. The idea that you...
where you become aware that you are actually in a dream, and therefore you can influence the way the dream develops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that common? Is it?
It's not particularly common. I've never been able to do it that I'm conscious of. But there is quite a lot of research going on about it, because they can see that if you could become aware within a nightmare that you're in a dream, then you could finish the nightmare. But I teach people you don't have to do it within the dream. You can actually finish your nightmare, wake up, think about it, and go back into the nightmare and finish it off. So you can still do that.
I wouldn't want to, I don't think.
Oh, well, that's what you should do if you're having a nightmare. You shouldn't forget it. You should deal with it.
Okay. Maybe I should. Yeah. Is there anything that that could help you lucid dream? Just while we're on the subject,
well, they've tried various methods, things like training yourself to look at your hand during the daytime and tell yourself I'm dreaming, and then when you are dreaming, to actually create an image of your hand and tell yourself you're dreaming. Okay. I don't understand how it works, because it doesn't work for me. But, I mean, books have been written about lucid dreaming, and they are very enthusiastic, and the International Association has just finished, I think, running its first conference on lucid dreaming. So there's plenty of possibility that it may develop in future, but it doesn't fit the notion that they had to set up the film Inception, which is the one that made it most popular, probably. I mean, it would be quite unethical for any professional dream worker to enter into the dreams of somebody else in order to influence them. So that's, I mean, potentially imaginative science fiction at present, but who knows? They might find ways to do it in the long run.
That's going to be my question. Is it possible?
Yeah.
Well, I can't answer from my experience, but there are people who could talk to you about it. There's one in New Zealand who lives in Westport, who is quite an expert on lucid dreaming, but his way of doing it is as imaginative adventures. He's not interested in whether it can have any reference to your actual life experience or not. I'm more interested in how do dreams feed back to you about your life, and what can they tell you, and what can they open up, and what are the possibilities within the normal process of dreaming. So
you say that these dreams can be just kind of half conscious, and that obviously when you are dreaming you do see a lot of things that's not familiar to yourself or a stranger's face, and that do you, because I've heard before, the dream is a language of the mind, something like that.
Yes, that's right.
Is any of that stuff that's happening in your dream, is any of that just kind of, can you extrapolate everything from it, or is there things that are just nonsense in the back of your head?
Good question.
Like how much can you pull from? How much can you pull from these?
We have a whole process of imagery that keeps running through our mind all the time, awake or asleep. Daydreaming is part of that continuum. And of course, with daydreaming, you do have consciousness and you can influence what's happening, but that's not the same as lucid dreaming, where the material comes to you without conscious will. Now, just focus me again. What part of it do you want to understand?
Can you take everything away from a dream, or is there parts that are just nonsense, or like is it all it's in your mind to do with that person, or is it just
how much of a dream can you really pull to be maybe this is something that I need to address in my real life or something like that?
All your dreams, most of your dreams are triggered by something that's on your mind at the present time in your life, and mostly they are the result of a kind of search that goes on inside your mind to help resolve certain kinds of issues that are going on in your life. Some of them are very minor, and a lot of dreams that we dream are pretty minor in the value, But every now and again you have something that you know is much more significant, often because you feel in your bones, oh, this is telling me something. What on earth does it mean? And that, I mean, when I look back through my dream journals, which I've been keeping for 35 years now, I can pick out maybe, about 10 dreams in a year that feel much more significant than the others. And I think as we get older, it's quite possible that we do have more dreams that seem not to have any connection with what's going on in our life. But the people that I work with, that I'm training, for example, in how to work with dreams themselves, how to work with others' dreams, they all have to bring a dream with them to a workshop, and every time we find meaning, and they find meaning in the dream that they had not noticed to begin with. And I mean, it's very easy for us to dismiss a dream as irrelevant or stupid or bizarre or peculiar until somebody else listens to it and makes a connection that does link with your life, and they say, hey, well, what about that? For example, I have worked with one particular buddy who's about the same age as me. We've been meeting regularly, at least once a month, for 35 years now. And she often finds elements in the dream that I've looked over. I have not noticed that they were significant, but she can see from her knowledge of me that they could be significant, and our process is to work with questions, to work with inquiry, a sort of empathic inquiry into the dream, and that begins to unravel all sorts of associations that may not have been apparent immediately, because a lot of them come up from your unconscious memory.
So I'm someone that dreams vividly every single night. I don't keep a dream journal, but every day I can wake up and retell it.
Well,
but that's could that be potentially linked to anything, or do you think it's like a overstimulation, or especially among youth today, there's so much going on all of the time. Do you think that that's just something ticking over in the head? Or?
It will be picking out elements that the dreams regard as interesting, either because they are something about your own behaviour, or because there is a puzzle involved, or, I mean, you can even dream about this kind of technical stuff, like how to solve it. But it is true that we do live pretty hectic sort of lives, and if we don't give ourselves time to meditate or reflect on them, we may well find that, like, a lot goes sort of whizzing through your head, and you don't have time to pay attention to it, and some of that is picked up by your dreams, and you still don't have time to pay attention. But it takes time to look into a dream. I mean, I tell my people to draw a dream. When you have a dream that you want to work with, draw it, and then look at all the elements in it. And if those different elements had a voice to speak, what would they say? And that usually tells you something.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I've watched people being utterly astounded at what they said about themselves when they listened to the dream.
So what does it mean for those that can't remember their dreams versus someone that will vividly dream and remember everything?
Well, one of the theories is that some people have what are called thin boundaries. Ernest Hartman in the United States, a psychiatrist, developed this idea that there are some people have thin boundaries which give easy access to unconscious material in the mind, but other people have thicker boundaries. Maybe it's inborn, but maybe it's also to do with habitual patterns. For example, I had a woman come to a dream group who presented a magnificent clairvoyant dream from when she was very young. She'd never forgotten it, but she says, I've never had one since. Well, after talking for a while, what emerged was she leaves the radio on all night, and if it's not on, she turns it on the minute she wakes up. So she never has time to remember what she dreamed. Right. So that's one reason, turning the radio on. Another one is, for example, people who have to get up very early in the morning may miss the main period of dream sleep, which is the last 3 hours or so is the main period of dreaming of a night's sleep. My father, for example, was a dairy farmer who often had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Well, I mean, he wouldn't be dreaming after that. He'd be looking at the cows. So, he maintained that he never dreamed. But when I read his diaries, there were 1 or 2 dreams in it.
So that could also explain that why if you get up in the morning to go to the toilet and then go back to sleep, that's when you're dreaming the most.
Catch a dream.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Understood.
That's okay. I have a terrible sleep cycle. Like I'm pretty happy if I can get 6 hours, but I still vividly dream. Like it's.
Well, that is good to hear because they recommend. Excuse me.
All right.
They recommend that everybody should have approximately 8 hours sleep a night to maintain good health.
That's right.
Now, you might run short by an hour. To run short regularly by 2 hours means you're depriving yourself.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily it doesn't gain you anything much. I mean, they also know from research, for example, with students sitting exams, that if you try swatting at the last minute, your brain remains scrambled. But if you complete your swatting the night before and have a good sleep, you'll do a much better answer to your exam papers.
Oh, that's great.
So you've got to allow time for the brain, for the brain to do its processing so that the mind relaxes.
So with these, some people have thicker boundaries and some people have the thinner boundaries. Does everyone dream? Like, say, if someone was, say, blind from birth,
Yep.
How would they have
They
a
dream in terms of emotion and feeling and texture,
Okay.
touch.
Yeah.
Because I've had several blind people I've talked with them about their dreams. If you have been sighted and then you lose your sight, you might still dream in imagery, in recognisable imagery. And some recent research suggests that blind people kind of create their own imagery to sort of make shapes out of what they experience. But if you think about someone like Helen Keller, who was deaf, dumb and blind, she was taught through touch to begin to understand language, and she dreamed in terms of vibrations.
Wow.
She knew there was somebody there because she could feel it in the floor or in the air. And she learned how to do it all, and she was very interested in the whole field of dreaming.
What could someone do day to day to make themselves more prone to dreaming? Or if you did want to try and see if you could make yourself dream more or something like that.
Well, first thing is to pay attention, which means you've got to, when you wake, allow 5 minutes or something less than that, maybe 3 minutes, to recall whether there is a dream still in your mind. But a lot of it depends on where you are in the sleep cycle, because the sleep cycle goes up and down during the night, and depending when you wake, you may wake directly out of a dream and catch it easily, or a dream may have finished and you may be in between before the next dream occurs, and that leaves you in a kind of creative mind space where you may do some quite creative thinking, because your brain is kind of hoping for more creativity, I suppose.
Is it a coincidence that a lot of these dreams, maybe it's because you are waking up or something like that, a lot of dreams tend to just kind of finish their story, if you will, and then you wake up? Is that you kind of...
Well, the normal process would be that, for example, the last period of REM sleep during the night might be half to 3/4 of an hour long. You've got time for more than one dream in there, in that period. If you are very concerned or disturbed about something, you may kind of be seeking for a dream, and you may be not exactly consciously, but kind of pushing towards how on earth can I resolve this, or what can I do to stop my father being so angry with me, or my girlfriend not taking any notice of me, or whatever. And when you find when the mind has achieved something like a possible solution or perception of what alternatives there are, it may move on to other things, because the complexity of the life that we lead nowadays is enormously greater than that our ancestors lived. I mean, if you think that the majority of our known ancestors up until about 100 years ago worked in the fields on farms, they were not encountering 100 people a day the way we are, and the variety of sources of information that are coming into us. So it's not surprising that our brains get kind of overloaded at times, and our dreams can get overloaded and try to sort of focus on one thing after another. But many of the great scientific experiments or scientific solutions have come through dreaming. I mean, a lot of the powerful people who are intensely thinking about a given problem and can't find a solution, give up, and then they kind of drop off to sleep or dozing or something, and suddenly a solution occurs.
Albert Einstein's thought experiments.
That's right. Yep. And Kekule with the which one was his? The chemistry elements, and somebody else. Elias Howe with the sewing machine needle. He didn't know. He was trying to develop an industrial needle that would stitch into the cloth and hold. And he couldn't figure out how to make a needle that would fit, because he was looking at the ordinary needle where the hole in the needle is at the far end of the point at one end, hole at the other end. And then he had a dream about being captured by savages in the jungle, and there he was surrounded by all their spears, and their spears had holes in the pointed end. And he woke up and leapt out of bed in great excitement because he had the solution.
Wow. That's incredible.
Is there something like you say there, if people are concerned about something or worrying about something, they might tend to dream more? What about diet, or I guess you kind of touched on it, like an emotional state or something like that? Is someone they say if you eat, like, say, cheese or something, you can dream a little bit more, or dairy products or something like that, but how can different emotional states also affect your dreaming?
Oh, emotional states can certainly affect them. High anxiety will block your dreams. I mean, if you're really anxious about something and you're churning over it, your mind doesn't relax enough to capture a dream. If you're really angry, you probably, it depends. If you can express it openly and deal with it, you may not dream about it. But if you're trying to suppress anger, for example, then you may well dream about taking actions of anger, like you kill the boss or whatever. That's quite a normal process. Nightmares are typically driven by having been a witness to or involved in some kind of violence that felt like a threat to your life. And nightmares keep repeating the sense that your life is at stake one way or another. And nightmares tend to wake you at the point when the worst is about to happen, and you wake up rather than dream it. You don't want to go through it again. And often in some cultures, people believe that it is predicting that you are going to lose your life, you are going to die. And so it's really important that people understand that after you've suffered a traumatic shock of one sort or another, and there's quite a range of different ways of being shocked, then there will be nightmares that try to help you come to terms with the fact that life includes severe risks of life and death, and you sometimes witness cruel things happening, and it does not fit your philosophy of life. So all of these things have got to be sorted through. You've got to reckon with them, talk about them. That's what counsellors are for a lot of the time.
Wow.
So at what point can you differentiate? Is a nightmare just something? Is that a dream that with a bad ending as such? It's
a very intense dream, and typically we define a nightmare as the kind that intense fear or horror that wakes you at a climax point. So that's the sort of classical definition. But there are lots of very disturbing dreams, which I would call nightmares, even if they don't wake you. And they are to do with trying to accept that something awful does happen and may happen to you if you don't take some kind of action. And of course, there are precognitive dreams that warn you to take action. There's a few. They are commoner than we thought. They do happen. Not all the time, though.
So is a nightmare really just projecting an insecurity that's kind of happening within yourself?
It can be. That can be one. That's the way they used to explain nightmares. They reckoned that nightmares were caused by inner conflict when one side of yourself disagreed so sharply with the other side that they, were having a kind of battle with each other. That was the way Freud or Jung largely understood nightmares. But since we've had the research on trauma, we know that any traumatic shock can set up a nightmare, and you do have to adjust your philosophy of life to allow for the fact that terrible things do happen. Even if you've been sheltered all your life, like terrible things may still happen.
Do you think the progression of technology is altering humans' dreams and nightmares? Or is it just something that we've always kind of come across from an emotional standpoint?
Would you have seen some change? I know you said, your dad's journal, he was busy, he didn't dream, and if he was working as a dairy farmer and that, I'm sure you've come across a wide range of people over the years. Has there been a ramp up in what's happening within their dreams or nightmares and that as the world started to tick over faster?
One dramatic example of that would be the spread of nightmares following the attack of COVID-19. Pretty well everybody in the population is anxious about COVID-19, about either getting it or somebody you love getting it, and if it's bad enough that you die or somebody dies. And the consequence of that is that everybody's anxiety sharpens the nightmare material that they're still processing in other ways, so that their nightmares become more extreme. And we get some very frightening kind of nightmares happening, which can be attributed to the fear, the general population fear. Now, some of the most interesting research about that followed the Twin Towers attack in New York, when some of the American researchers asked people to send in journal entries that they had kept, those that were keeping a regular dream journal, journal entries before and after the Twin Towers attack. And there were a few people who had dreamed of aeroplanes hitting buildings or something like that. Not enough to identify that what would happen or when. And there were a widespread reportage of nightmares everywhere afterwards, because the whole population was afraid, who's amongst us? Who's going to blow us up?
So it's not necessarily the progression of technology, it's more these bigger sort of disasters and moments that are happening in the world.
Well, the technology brings it into our living rooms so that we can watch
everything's
the
more
planes
accessible.
hitting the buildings and fear for ourselves. So the fear is more widespread now. Yes.
So with that progression of technology, do you think that one day, like you see it in films, that they can project someone's dreams onto a screen? Do you think that one day we'll ever get to that stage? Is that something?
That's a kind of holy grail that they're hoping for.
Yeah, is that scientifically possible, or is it like
not yet? And in fact, scary, because if other people can witness what's going on in your dreams, you can be accused of things that didn't happen.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what used to happen sometimes in tribal societies, that if you dreamed something, they did not distinguish between whether it was physically real or not.
Wow.
And so like the origin of nightmares was they developed this theory that a demon was riding you in your sleep. And that's the nightmare, the mare, yeah.
Oh.
There you go. That's where that comes from.
Yes.
So when it comes to something like a reoccurring nightmare, is that just your pretty much your brain just telling you like you need to address this over and over?
Yes, that's right. If it's recurring, it's important. I had a guy come to see me to try and unravel a nightmare that he'd been having all his life, as far as he could remember. He was now 59 years old, about to turn 60, and he said, I'm sick of this. I've got to resolve this. Because the nightmare that happened showed a figure approaching. Well, it was a vague figure, like a cloud really, coming towards him, and what he knew in his dream was that if it got him, he would be killed, he would die. And there was an image, sometimes there was an image of a door or a step or something like that, but it was never very clear. And he used to wake from that dream. It was frequent in childhood, became less frequent, but still continued occasionally as an adult for, right up all his life. And he could not pinpoint anything in his life that produced the same level of terror that he felt in this dream. Furthermore, every time he dreamed it, he spent the next day expecting to die. And so, it shook him up a whole lot all the time, again and again. I inquired quite, purposefully into what parts of his life might possibly have brought on terror like this. He couldn't identify anything at that level. And what I thought, it feels like child terror, like the terror that a child has being helpless. So in the end I asked him, did anything happen to you very early in your life? And he didn't remember, but he had been told that he, at the age of 15 months, was put into hospital with croup. That's that very severe cough. And the treatment in those days was to put you into a little sort of tent thing where the fumes of cresoline would clear your bronchies. And so, of course, at the age of 15 in those days, 60 years ago, more now, parents were not allowed to stay with a child. So they had to hand him over to a nurse or a doctor and go. And the child, of course, was terrified, expected to be, killed, died, had no way of understanding what was going on. Furthermore, he had another hospitalisation not long afterwards, which probably confirmed the same thing. So that's what we identified. Now, what was clear was his mind did not remember, but his body did. His body carried the memory of something that had happened to him very early. Now, we know from other research that the hippocampus, which stores episodic memory, does not kick into action until about 2.5 to 3, depending on how it works. So we would not remember any brutality, for example, that happened to us before, let's say 2.5, if not 3.
But the body would.
Yeah, but the body remembers, and the body will react at times in quite sharp ways. Anyway, having identified that this was happening, I said to him, you've got to invent a new answer to this now. You've got to create a new ending for this dream. And he went home and he thought about it, and he invented his own ending, which was that he would turn and confront the doom figure approaching him and say, I can leave my body. And in the dream, the doom figure dissolved. So he was so delighted that he practiced it again, and it happened again. And then, from then on, he never had that dream again. And he said his whole life felt different. He didn't feel scared to die all the time.
Hold on to that for 58 years.
I had a similar thing happen where I was getting chased by a scarecrow or something, and I had it a couple of times, and then I clicked, and I turned and it was chasing me, and I turned and stopped, looked at it, and it just kind of picked me up. And then once it picked me up, it didn't know what to do, so it just kind of put me back down, and that was that. I never had it again.
Oh, that's all right. It solved itself. Yes, but soldiers from the war, for example, a lot of good research was done by, forgotten his name for the moment. Anyway, a Jungian analyst who worked in a veterans hospital in San Antonio in the United States, where veterans from the Vietnam War were put into this kind of home as a shelter because they were incapable of maintaining jobs. Now, when how silly not to remember his name. When he asked them about their experience, nobody had bothered to ask them about their experience. Nobody had even listened to their dreams. They were all having terrible nightmares every night, particularly a recurring theme of something that was just too terrible, that often something that they themselves had done that was unbearable to remember. Anyway, he worked with them. And he categorised the nightmares. He said a Category 1 nightmare was a direct memory of what had happened, not necessarily perfectly accurate, but close to exactly what had happened. Category 2 was when fantasies begin to enter into the nightmare, and the difference was where they woke from the Category 1 nightmare believing that it had just happened all over again. Then when they woke from a Category 2 nightmare, they would say, thank God that didn't happen, something that they'd imagined. And then over time, as he continued to work with them, then the nightmares resolved by the fear went out of them, and they could just be remembered as ordinary memories. Oh, well, yes, that did happen to me, but it doesn't bother me anymore.
Wow.
So that was worth finding out, because what it means is that you can actually directly work with nightmare memories to alter them, to alter the memory. You can't change what actually happened, but you can change the way they remember it.
So like PTSD is just a form of a dream or form of a nightmare
yes.
that people have, and
yes.
things like that. To get rid of or finish the nightmare and change the story,
right.
you kind of have to confront it.
That's right.
So how would, say, someone, if they'd been to war and, you know, soldiers or ex-military that suffer from PTSD, what's the best way to kind of...
Well, the immediate best way is for them to share their story with a sympathetic listener who can say, I know what that's like because I was there too, or I've been through the same kind of thing. Or what Wilbur found when he worked with them in the hospital to create a group where the men shared their stories and realised I'm not the only one who did that kind of thing or who felt that way. So the first thing then is to share it, and if you're working with a therapist, the therapist tries to introduce new perspectives. So if you look at this from another point of view, I mean, I've had people come to me who have had a sudden death in the family and are terribly upset because they never got time to say goodbye. Well, after I've listened for a while and gained a certain amount of trust, I say, well, how about you sit in that chair over there and you be the one who has died, who is looking back. What do you think they would want to say to you? And the person moves across into the chair, becomes the other person, allows the, let's say, the spiritual message to speak. And often it's very relieving, very like, well, thank you for saying that, or no, it wasn't like that, or whatever, you know. So they begin to accept the idea that the other person has moved on. And what's really important to understand is that the relationship that used to be a physical relationship is now a spiritual relationship, and it is quite possible to maintain a spiritual companionship.
Well,
that so I guess coming off the side of PTSD, when you say you kind of categorize, he categorized those dreams, when does something like sleep paralysis or night terror come into something like that? Or what can make you more prone to that?
Okay, sleep terrors technically are the terrified crying, usually of a young child with no words to describe what set it going. And parents can do nothing to resolve it. They simply have to soothe the child and perhaps walk with them, soothe them, rock them until the terror wears off. Now, I've come across a couple of theories about it, of which the one that seems to me most likely is that it is memories of of a traumatic birth experience held in the body. Where a child, one woman had twin babies. One was a girl and one was a boy. The girl's birth was easy and came straight out without problems. But the boy's birth required forceps, and it was a very traumatic birth for mother and baby. And that little boy had night terrors for years.
Wow.
And she attributed it to the difference in the birth experience they had, which seemed to me to be quite a sensible way of thinking about it. There are other theories that maybe we carry memories from a previous life, and I don't dismiss that as impossible now. I used to, but I think it is some people quite clearly do have that kind of memory.
Well, could that be the case of, say, there are cases of these sleep terrors happening to people into their adults? It's not necessarily just with young kids, like predominantly, right? But
predominantly kids. I've heard of, maybe only one or two where it has gone on into adulthood. What it sounds like then might be a psychotic episode. And of course, if you have very thin boundaries, you are more at risk of psychosis.
So do you ask, in some way or another, it can be linked to a past trauma, but usually something like a rough birth or something like that?
It's a theory. I don't know whether you can ever prove it.
Right. Yeah.
In the way that science likes to prove things.
Yeah.
You can probably gather enough information from enough examples that you could generalize a probability, I suppose, something like that.
And then what about something like sleep paralysis? I mean, it's never happened to me. I don't know what it's like. I've only heard stories.
Everybody is paralyzed during REM sleep. When you're in REM sleep, the motor control center is switched off. So your whole system below the neck, below the joint, wherever it is there, is immobilized during the REM sleep. And that's obviously a protective mechanism to stop you acting it out. Above that, you may still be able to talk or shake your head or cry or whatever, even cry out. There are... I know. The recovery from paralysis during REM sleep depends on a synchronization between the motor control switching on and the dream finishing at the same time. Now, if they get out of sync, then you may have paralysis lasting longer than the dream for a few minutes.
How come? Is there a reason it seems so real at the time, as opposed to sometimes a dream? It does seem kind of vague in that, and you know where you are, but it doesn't look like where you are, and all those sort of things. But anyone that talks about sleep paralysis says, I swear I was awake. There was just, the feeling of something on your chest, or you can't talk, you can't yell out, but you do 100% think you're awake. Is that...
How long does it last?
I don't know.
See, I would consider that it's probably something to do with the motor control centre not synchronizing properly. But, I know that sleep researchers or sleep, what do they call themselves? People who deal with sleep difficulties do encounter that kind of experience being reported. So the other possibility that occurs to me is that it's a metaphor, that the paralysis is a metaphor about something in their life that they're unable to act upon. But again, that's theory, and I have not read anything that persuades me of a good explanation for that other than the synchronization. They also know that during REM sleep, some people do act out a dream. I've had several people come to see me as a result of that happening, because the motor centre was overridden by the level of anger or fear going on in the dreamer. Now, I had one guy come to see me with his leg in plaster. Father brought him because he couldn't drive. And I said, well, what happened to you? And he said, well, I was having this dream. I was in my room and the water was rising so fast I was going to drown if I didn't kick the window out. So I kicked it out. Now, he did that within the dream, not knowing that he was doing it. So what that's called is a REM sleep disorder, because it shouldn't happen. Now, if it happens frequently, the brain needs to be checked for possible early signs of Parkinson's disease, like early motor problems in the brain.
Damn.
So is that could the same be said to someone that's prone to sleepwalking then?
Sleepwalking is different. Doesn't happen during REM sleep.
Right.
Happens during stage 3 sleep before you get to REM sleep. And it's a reflection of considerable disturbance or anxiety in the person. They walk, they are still asleep in their mind, but they are responsive to talking if you talk to them quietly and say, okay, let's go back to bed now, and they will usually cooperate. But there are also people who apparently are still asleep while they go and raid the fridge in the middle of the night and things like that.
So why is it dangerous to wake up a sleepwalker then?
Why is it dangerous?
Well, I don't know if that's fact. I've just heard it,
Well, you don't... I don't know that it's dangerous. It just seems to be unwise.
It just gives them a bad fright, isn't it?
I don't know enough about that.
Now, your work with visions, this is something that we are unfamiliar with. So could you kind of explain, I know it's a broad question, but...
Well, there are many kinds of visions. Probably the one you might have heard most about is when somebody has lost a parent or relative, they've died, and the deceased one comes back after death looking healthy and kind of either grins and says hello or goodbye or something that leaves the dreamer reassured that they are alive in another dimension. So that's quite a powerful vision.
Yeah.
And that's surprisingly frequent in the population. There's often somebody in a family system who has had a visit from a deceased relative, sometimes very close to the experience, close to the funeral time, but sometimes quite a bit afterwards. I mean, and...
What about relatives that aren't alive yet? So like I've had dreams where I've met my son or met my daughter. Is that something similar? Like what's going on there versus having a vision of seeing a deceased?
Right, well, that does happen.
Yeah.
People do have those kind of dreams. I don't know how to explain that, except I would call it a spiritual experience in one way or another.
Okay.
And people have told me about seeing their future husband and things like that in a dream, or the future house that they're going to buy. And it isn't until they're actually standing in front of this property that they realise I dreamed about it.
Yeah.
The other relatively common experience is what's called a near-death vision, near-death experience. People who are technically dead, the brain is dead or not operating, but they wake up with a memory of having been out of body, and then there's a whole series of things that could happen. It was first described by Raymond Moody in 1975 in a book called Life After Life. And it upset all the medical doctors enormously because they didn't believe that it was possible. And if you're really interested in that kind of vision, look up Eben Alexander on Google and watch him delivering a talk about his experience, because he was in hospital with cerebral meningitis for a week, and they thought he was dying, and they were ready to pull the plug because they couldn't rescue him. His brain was totally scrambled. The monitors of brain waves were showing that there was no functioning brain work at all. But after he'd recovered enough to remember, he remembered a whole series of journeys that he'd taken part in while he was in the hospital with his brain non-functional. His heart was still going, but his brain wasn't. And he's quite sure that there is another level of dimension beyond that we go to when we die.
It's hard to believe, but I believe it. Like it's
I hope
crazy.
so.
Well, I mean, there's books, there's lots and lots of examples now. I mean, there are thousands of people who have been resuscitated. There was a doctor, again, the name's just dropped out of my mind, in Holland, who arranged a team of people to interview everyone who came into the hospital and was resuscitated after a heart attack. How many of them had any memory of anything that happened? And a fraction of them, not quite 10%, I think, remembered some parts of a story, and about 5% remembered a full story. So what he was able to conclude was this is certainly a real experience for a proportion of the population, and maybe for everybody, but not everyone remembers.
Man. Do you want to...
Yeah. So just to kind of wrap it up a bit there, Margaret, I just want to go through some common dreams that people have, and we've had people message us, and I'm just going to throw some out there, and if you could kind of quickly debunk them, if that's possible.
I can't debunk them, but I can tell you I've got a list of the commonest dreams.
Oh, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, if you can run us through that, that works. So people that have these common dreams, and we say common as in people
an act or something happens to them.
Yeah, a lot of people have the same ones.
Yes.
Is there no one way to describe what goes on, or is it?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the commonest dream of all is falling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that is an instinctive fear in all of us from babyhood on, that we're afraid of falling, afraid of dropping. Now, I mean, it's not necessarily physical falling that we're that generates the dream. It could be a metaphor for falling short of something, falling out, falling in, falling over, falling... all the different ways in which we talk about falling.
So that one's quite literal then.
Well, it's a metaphor. It can be a metaphor, or it can be for real. It's more likely to be a metaphor about I'm afraid I will... Well, falling out of an aeroplane, for example, and things like that. Okay. What does it mean to fall in that kind of sense? Well, it means losing your grip on the reality that you're part of. And so you look then at what's going on in their life that feels like falling. That's the way to think of it. Being chased is another very common one. And children, of course, love chasing each other. And so, I mean, there's often quite scary memories associated with being chased, which get reactivated when you're feeling that somebody's got it in for you one way or another. So that, that's kind of a general common metaphor. Back in school, you're struggling away, trying to pass an exam or trying to understand a teacher or something like that, which would reflect parallel situations in life where you're trying to understand something and it's not working, or somebody's trying to teach you and you can't get it, that sort of thing. They haven't listed bullying here, but bullying would be a very common one here in New Zealand. In fact, it's not only New Zealand, but I hear a lot about it through supervisors who work with employees who are in trouble. They feel that they're being bullied. Now, bullying is very widespread in our workplaces, one way or another, because people are elevated into a position as a manager and given no training in how to do it, and no training in the skill of relationships in managing people who are not doing what you actually want them to do. How do you deal with it, Flying, that's a common one. And that's usually a happy dream.
Yeah, it's usually pretty cool when you...
Yeah, so you can enjoy the flying one, unless you're trying to fly away from something, which maybe that some people have. Having sex with somebody that you shouldn't have. 31% of nightmares fall into that category, apparently. And that's normal because during REM sleep, your sex hormones are working. They're actually lifting you a little bit. And it's not at all unusual to have sexual kind of feelings as part of the normal sleep cycle. So, you don't have to feel that there's something wrong with you. And someone you shouldn't, well, it's probably a heroic person of some sort or a celebrity that looks a bit like someone that you know. Encountering someone who has died, well, we've talked about that. Death of yourself, dreaming that you die. And you don't necessarily, it's not necessarily the end of something. Some people have reported dreams of dying and then looking down on their body and moving on. So you can dream that. Teeth falling out is a very common one, especially for radio presenters.
Yeah,
really?
So what does that mean? Is it?
It means you've said words you wish you hadn't said.
Ah. Okay. Still got all my teeth, do I?
Being lost, going nowhere, being stuck, moving in slow motion.
Yeah, so that moving in slow motion, like I've often had dreams of that. You try to run or you try to punch or something, and everything just you feel like the fabric of time is just being like ripped around you and you can't move. Is it?
Well, that's just the motor control system.
Yeah,
stopping you from acting.
You're right.
So that's actually just within your own body.
Yeah.
That's,
Or the other possibility would be that it's a metaphor about wanting to be able to move faster in a given situation and finding that you can't get through, can't do it. Missing a bus or a train or a phone or a plane, all of those are quite common. Anyway, those are some of the common ones.
Yeah.
Would that cover your list? Or?
Yeah, that's
more or less.
more than what
one
I had.
I was asked from a friend, a drowning or kind of being crushed by a wave.
Right, tidal wave.
Yeah.
Tidal wave is the commonest nightmare image described by Ernest Hartman in the nightmare patients that he worked with. And, of course, it's a surge of something coming at you and it's going to overwhelm you. Well, it's a metaphor about a surge of emotional stuff that you're going to have to deal with.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah. All
Mm.
right, Margaret, well, that's about us for what we have. We thank you very much for your time.
Yes, you're welcome.
If anyone wanted to get in contact with you, where can they look you up?
Yes, well, I've got a website, www.dreamwork.co.nz. Did you have a look at that? Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that'll give them Margaret at dreamwork.co.nz. They can get hold of me.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And then you have your books there. What are they called if someone wanted to read those?
This one, I sell that one at $40, or you can order it direct from Calico. I have had it in a bookshop, but didn't sell fast enough to please the bookseller, so they don't stock it. So you have to order it online. This one's out of print now. It was published, both of them published here in New Zealand. Problem in New Zealand is we're a very secular society and not many people take their dreams seriously enough to spend money on a book about it. Unless they look something up that says 10,000 dreams interpreted,
Yeah.
That gives them possibilities, it does not give them answers.
All right. All right, Margaret. Well, thank you very much. We'll wrap that up there.
Yes.
Follow us on Off Topic Chat on Instagram and Off Topic Jandy at gmail.com
for our email. Once again, thank you for your time. That was something else.
Yeah, it's incredible.
I had a certain how I thought it was going to go, and it's just blown that out of the water. Just learning some of that stuff and hearing it's made me want to rethink, take it all a bit seriously.
I'm going to keep a dream journal
Keep
now.
a journal.
I think
I need to write it down because you have
keep
that
a dream journal because it gives you the themes that are going on as undercurrents in your life.
You have that. If you don't kind of at least acknowledge it in that first 15 minutes, it goes.
You're liable to lose them unless they're extremely strong. Yes. Good.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good night, eh?